In our episodes, we discuss cases and topics that might be distressing or disturbing to some listeners. Listener discretion is advised. Leah Zeiger, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
Thank you. I'm great. I'm happy to be here. I'm so glad that you reached out and excited for this conversation.
Yeah, definitely. And so I found you through the National Domestic Violence Hotline network, and you're part of a network of speakers. How did you get into that network?
Yeah, it was a long time ago. I started speaking publicly about my survivorship in 2015, and I did a lot of various kinds of speaking engagements. This was while I was in college.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I was doing some writing on my website about being a survivor. And I think they had someone try to find like survivor writers for blogs that they were doing. And so that's how one of the hotline members found me. And so I started with them just doing some guest blog posts. But from there, the relationship kept growing. In 2019, I was one of their featured speakers for their Domestic Violence Awareness Month campaigns. They did like a video campaign where I told my story a little bit on video. And then most recently, in 2021, they had their 25th anniversary gala in Washington, D.C., and they commissioned me to choreograph a new performance for that gala. And so we had this really great collaborative experience where I got to have a composer come on and create a new score. And I brought on three beautiful dancers, and then we created this piece called Bittersweet, and we took it to Washington, D.C. and performed it live at the gala, which was really beautiful. It was at this really gorgeous outdoor venue where you could see the Capitol Hill building, like right behind the
Wow.
stage, which was so cool. And then later, they actually commissioned that dance to become a dance film.
Mm.
And we have created the film in partnership with the hotline, and they share it when they do film screenings of various kinds, and it's a resource on their website as well as mine. So we've done a lot of different partnerships over the years, but always I've said yes to any speaking engagements that come my way through the hotline, so long as I'm available on the day, because it ranges in audience and topic, and I really do enjoy this work. So I'm always happy to get those emails when they're like, "Someone's looking for a survivor." I'm like, that's me.
Yeah, absolutely. And why do you think it's so important to continue sharing these types of experiences?
I think it's twofold. It's for me and it's for everyone else. For
Mhm.
me, this is the healing path that I chose, and that works really well for me. It's not the healing path that works well for every survivor, of course, but for those survivors who do feel able and empowered to tell their story, it can be so cathartic, because suddenly we no longer have something that is only a problem, only a pain. It's now become a light and a joy for ourselves and for someone else. And that transformation is so integral to my healing process. And I know many other survivors as well. But also, I think about what could have prevented the experience that I had. And what I come up against mostly is that I really didn't know what the possible dangers were out there for me. And so I didn't know what to look for. And I think if I had had someone like me talking to me when I was 12 or 13 or 14, uh,
Mhm.
I don't know if it truly would have prevented anything, but it certainly would have changed the trajectory of what happened. And I think I would have been more capable of recognizing what was going on quicker, because it took a very long time for me to recognize it. And I did not know that I was in any danger for a long time. And so I didn't reach out to any adults who could have quickly recognized it and stepped in to help me. So I think about that a lot, because I feel strongly that the more we talk about it, the less power it has, and we know how to prevent domestic violence and abusive relationships. So we just have to do it. It's not a secret. We're not figuring out what the cure is. We know what the cure is,
Mhm.
but it just doesn't get done enough.
Yeah. I think it's similar also to like why some people don't come forward with things like sexual assault is, maybe there's a lot of shame and whatever, but if people understood how frequent it happens, like you wouldn't feel so alone and you'd be, you know, like more emboldened to actually tell someone what's happening. And then like you said, you actually, if you know about it and you're hearing about it so often, you actually are able to recognize it within yourself or if it's
Mhm.
happening to you. So I think that's
Exactly.
really great. Getting into your story, you were younger when this happened, right? I mean, like relatively younger. It was in like it
Yeah.
was in high school, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. And can you set the scene for us? Like, how old were you? What was your life like? Your parents' relationship? Like, what was going on in your life before you met this person?
So I was 15. I was a sophomore in high school. I grew up in LA, had these really lovely parents, I still have these really lovely parents who are so in love with each other and modeled this really beautiful relationship. And I like to include that detail because a lot of times people kind of assume that the only people who will fall victim to abuse are people who have never known what real love looks like. And that's so not true.
Mm-hmm.
I had a perfect example. My parents were together, both sets of my grandparents were together and still very much in love. I had fantastic examples of what healthy love would look like, but examples is not prevention.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I was a cheerleader and a dancer. I had a lot of friends. I had good grades. I had a robust social life. I mean, I was a pretty typical teenager. And one of my older friends on the cheer squad, she was a senior, knew a lot of people from our rival high school and took me to a birthday party of one of her friends of this rival high school one day. And that's where I met this boy. He was a senior at the rival high school. And we kind of like made eyes at each other from across the room. I don't think we even spoke, but it was clear like that we liked each other.
Yeah.
And in typical teenage fashion, my friend and his friend exchanged our numbers for us. And then we started texting and eventually decided to hang out. And I think on like our third hangout, he asked me to be his girlfriend. And I was so excited because he was a senior and I was a sophomore and he went to a different school. And, there's that kind of fluttery, oh, like I'm special and he chose me feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And it did start out totally normal and cute and just like any high school relationship would start. Um, but pretty quickly, looking back, I see them as red flags now. In the moment, I did not see them as red flags, but
Yeah.
pretty quickly, some of those started to pop up. Most of those red flags were him claiming that he had heard stories about me flirting with someone at school or cheating on him. And I would have to explain that away, even though those were made up. Those were not rumors that were going around.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but he would claim that he had heard something and he would do it so innocently. And I would say, "Oh my gosh, no, that's not true at all." And I would have to think like, well, what boys did I talk to in math class that maybe could have started this rumor, and then have to kind of explain all my behavior to him and lay out my whole day to him and who I talked to. And so that kind of started this pattern of me having to over explain everything. And I've always felt like I was on the defense. I always felt like um, I would be accused of something and I would have to figure out how to prove that it wasn't true. And these accusations were not based in any truth. He also would claim that he had many girlfriends cheat on him in the past, and that I know now is a lie, but it was a very convenient excuse for this distrust that he felt. Um, and yeah, I just remember the first few months just always feeling a little bit of nervousness every time we would hang out because I knew that there would be something that would come up that I would have to be on the defense for. And then once we got past that, I'd be like, oh, okay, like now we can hang out and be
Yeah.
normal. But there was always that. And it would ramp up a little bit each time to where it got more invasive. He wanted to go through my phone. He had all my passwords to all my social media accounts. Um, this was before I think phones would like share location. Like this was before iPhones. So thankfully he did not have my location, but
Right.
had it happened now, I'm sure he would have. Um, but he was as involved in all of that as possible, and was very critical if I ever talked to a boy or noticed a boy. I remember when we would like go to the mall, I would have to look at the ground the whole time because if he thought that I was looking at a boy, he would get so angry. And it's impossible to not look at a boy in the mall
Right.
because there's just people around and you
Yeah.
can't not, So I would just stare at the ground the whole time. And yeah, it just kind of continued to ramp up always in the frame of like, I love you so much and I'd be devastated if you cheated on me. So I have to make sure that you don't by taking all these measures. And it's all these other girls who really mess me up. So you have to kind of like account for that behavior of my exes
Right.
acting
And
this way.
I feel like that is something that in I don't know, in my head at least, that seems like it's so common. Which like and it's not like a normal behavior, but I feel like you always hear so many people having experiences like that. And it's always interesting cuz like, you just wonder like where does that come from? Like what is he achieving in doing this to you? It's
Yeah,
just
I think
crazy.
it is crazy and it is so common. It's the first thing I talk about when I talk to teenagers when I'm doing
Mhm.
prevention work, which is that jealousy is not love. And there is no amount of jealousy that is appropriate in a healthy relationship. Jealousy is a natural emotion that arises in people, but someone in a healthy relationship can say, I'm experiencing jealousy. I need to take a moment to like fix that for myself, not I'm
Right.
experiencing jealousy, therefore you have to change your behavior, right? And
Yes.
that's the difference that I think a lot of us don't recognize because we think, well, of course, everyone gets jealous every now and then. And that's true. Everyone gets mad too. But just because someone got angry doesn't mean they're allowed to hit you, right?
Right.
And just because someone got jealous doesn't mean they're allowed to control your behavior.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that what he was gaining from that was it was like a grooming pattern where
Mm.
I got used to this cycle of having to like be on the defense, always be um thinking, well, what is he going to say about this? And like I said, I was changing my behavior. I stopped talking to any male friends that I had or any like male classmates. I had a male classmate partner once for a project. And I remember asking my teacher if I could switch to have a girl because I was just worried about the backlash. I unfriended and unfollowed like all the boys that I had friended or followed in my social media.
Right.
I changed the way that I dressed. I like was actually changing my behavior in order to avoid this conflict. And none of that was ever enough because the conflict continued to escalate. So none of my behavior was good enough for him. And so it really set me up for this pattern of always being on the back foot, always being the one who has to explain and then the one who has to apologize, the one who has to beg for him to stay, the one who has to prove that she's worthy of this relationship. So it really diminished my sense of self-worth so that when he started to become sexually and physically abusive, I was primed for that because I
Mm.
was already my sense of self-worth was in the gutter. I was already used to begging for him. I was already used to being punished for things whether or not I deserved a punishment. um, So it was a pretty easy transition for him to start becoming physically violent and sexually violent, and I stayed because I was already kind of brainwashed to
Yeah.
accept that behavior.
And so you said originally, like in the moment, you didn't recognize some of the behaviors as red flags. When you were in the relationship, when did you start to realize that it was not normal?
I wish I could tell you exactly when or what it was. I think about it a lot because what happened at the end of our relationship, we were together for 9 months.
Hmm.
And by the time we got to that 9 month mark, I had already tried to break up with him 6 times. And
Wow.
the only successful one was the seventh, which is actually the national average. That someone in an abusive relationship, it on average takes 7 attempts to break up with the partner. So that's also something that I like to talk about because a lot of us have a lot of shame about those on again, off again relationships, and
Hmm.
friends and family can get really exhausted by those, which is understandable. But it could be a sign of something, more sinister going on. I'm not saying every on again, off again relationship is abusive, but it could
Hmm.
be something to think about if your friend is going through that or your sibling or something. Um, and the time that it actually worked, I do think part of it was I remember that day at school, I was texting with him at lunch, and my friends pulled me aside and they were like, you know, we don't know much about relationships. I was really the only one of my friends who was in relationships in high school. They were like, but I'm pretty sure that it's not a good sign that every time he texts you, you get this like scared, upset look on your face. Like you don't seem happy to hear from him. And that doesn't seem right. And they
Hmm.
were coming at this from a pretty innocent angle of like, we don't even really know him, but like it just doesn't seem like he makes you happy because when he texts you, you freak out. And I was like, you don't know anything. I love him, blah, blah, blah. But that night, something just kind of flipped in me, and we were having another fight, um, which at that point we would fight like clockwork every single night on the phone. And I realized that I just didn't want it anymore. And it was like all of a sudden the brainwashing kind of turned off.
Hmm.
Um, and it took a long time to be able to then look back and see the major red flags I missed. And I mean, when I'm talking major red flags, I'm talking like he tried to kill me twice while we were in the relationship. And that was not something that occurred to me that I could leave. It
Wow.
didn't even seem like an option. Um, because he had really done a good job of convincing me that I needed him, that no one else would love me, that I was worthless, and that I deserved all of that treatment. Even in him going through this cycle of abuse and then apology and making up for it, even somehow within the apology, there would be blame of, but you did deserve it, but I'm still sorry, you know?
Hmm.
And so even in the apology, like I would feel bad and I would apologize and, I'm sorry for making you so angry and leading you to do this and all of that. So, yeah, I wish that it was clear to me what it was that got me out of that mindset, because I remember it feeling like blindfold was taken off and I was like, oh, this sucks. I'm not happy. It wasn't in that moment that I was like, oh, this was abuse, but it was
Right.
just like, I don't like it and I'm not happy and I'm just going to break up with you. And not fall for your tricks anymore, you know?
Hmm.
Unfortunately, that wasn't the end of the relationship. Uh, he continued to harass and abuse me for many, many months after that. And I don't know if you want me to get into that whole part of the story too.
Yeah, no, but before we get into that, can you talk about the escalation from it going from kind of controlling your behavior to being so, severe that he's actually trying to kill you?
Yeah. I mean, like anything, it was gradual.
Mhm.
Um, and it would start with just him kind of holding my wrist really tight while we were walking, or kind of pulling me a little bit or yanking me around. And then it also began with some sexual stuff. He would tell me that we would need to do things that had never done before and didn't necessarily want to do, but really didn't know how to say no. Especially to someone who there was kind of the unspoken, like, no is not an option. So you're just
Mhm.
going to do this. And we moved very fast sexually, but we never actually fully had sex until like maybe 6 or 7 months in.
Mhm.
Um, and I remember that day very well. Because it was the first time that I had done any of that. And now I see that it was rape. It was not sex. It was not consensual. At the time, I thought that it was sex. I thought that that's what it was. But he uh, just kind of got the idea in his head one day. We were driving in his car. I don't know where we were going. And he decided it was time. And he went to a convenience store and bought condoms, and then found an abandoned apartment building and parked in the parking lot behind it and raped me in the back seat. And I remember being so confused because I knew I didn't want it, and I knew I wasn't ready, and I knew I was very scared the whole time. I felt really worried about showing him that I was not into it and that I was in pain, because I knew that he would not react kindly to that. And he was telling me, like, this is what people do who are in love, and you love me, right? This is what people do who aren't cheating, and you're not cheating, right? So it was kind of like, it was like, just this backwards, like, well, okay, yes, I love you, and no, I'm not cheating on you, but I still don't want to do this. But that wasn't an option. There was like, if it's true that you love me, and if it's true that you are not cheating on me, then you'll do this for me.
Mhm.
um and I also remember thinking very clearly after that, that I would never be able to say no. That, like, once that had happened, it was over, and he had access to that now, and there was no going back. And I remember that night, him telling me, because he would tell me, I would trust you more if you would have sex with me before it happened, because you're not having sex with me, so who are you having sex with, right? And I was like, no one. But
Right.
it was a trust thing for him. And of course, after he did rape me, he said, "Oh, wow, you gave that up really easy. You're such a slut. You didn't even feel like you were a virgin. You know, I can't believe that you just gave it up that easy. How can I trust you?" Like, it
So
really
it's like
was
you
just,
can never win.
you can never win. That's what it feels like. It feels like this person who says they love you, and who says that they want to take care of you, is writing the rules to your reality. And no matter how well you play the game, you will never win. There's no option for you winning. That's not the point. The moment you do the thing that they say you have to do, the bar has moved and the
Mhm.
rules have changed, and now that was actually the entirely wrong thing to do. And so you're just constantly confused and alone, and you feel dumb because you feel like, why can't I get this right? And I thought I was doing the right thing, and okay, I'm not, and now I have to apologize for the thing that you did ask me to do, I'm pretty sure, but I guess not. And nothing makes sense. Like, all of reality is just flipped on its head. And from the outside, if you're looking at it, it looks so obviously bad, but from the inside, you have to remember that you're wearing, like, those, like, drunk goggles. It's like you have no, like, real sense of
Right.
reality. You can't tell what's up and down. Everything is messed up. Um I wasn't getting any sleep because he would call me all night, um, fighting. And I mean, I was barely talking to my friends. I was barely talking to my family. There was a part of me that understood that if I explained to my friends or my family his behavior, that they would start raising alarm bells. And so I just didn't talk to them about it because I didn't have a good explanation for it. And anytime they would say something, I would have to vehemently defend him, because really what I was defending was my perceived sanity, where I was like, well, no, because if he's actually really bad, then how could I be in this relationship? So of course he has to be really good. So I have to defend him. And in doing that, it's like I'm doing the work of brainwashing for him. You
Right.
become a brainwasher yourself, which is by design. That's not an accident. And so after he had raped me the first time, there was a pattern where he would come over, and sneak into my house every night and rape me and leave. And then I would wake up to a text of him saying something along the lines of, well, who came over after me last night? And I would have to say, no one. And there's no way to prove something didn't happen. So I would have this argument with him via text all day. It would distract me all day at school. By the nighttime, I would have a phone call with him and we would argue about it. And I would sob and I would beg for him to not leave me and to believe me. And then he would say, fine, I'm coming over. And the cycle would repeat. And it went like that for a couple of months nonstop. Um, and then it also was physically violent as well throughout all of this. I mean, it would range. But I remember thinking, wow, he's smart, because he would not leave bruises where you could see them. So it was mostly like stomach and back. So I would wear a shirt to school and no one would see it. Um, I also remember him explaining to me how to cut my wrists and telling me that I should do it and making me do that, um, which set me up for self harm for many years after that, because that was, I was basically trained to do it. And then there were a couple instances where he was driving us home from a date or something, and we were fighting, and he was driving really, really fast, and I was very scared. And I kept saying, like, stop driving so fast, please slow down. And eventually he got so frustrated that he just pulled over on the freeway and made me get out of the car. And I stood on the side of the freeway for probably like 30 minutes, and then he did come back and get me. And I was expected to be very grateful for the fact that he came back to get me and didn't leave me on the side of the freeway. Um, and there was another time that he did try to strangle me in the car as well. And I do remember thinking, like, there's no way that this can be like the same thing that my parents have. Like, I remember
Right.
that little thought. Um, And when he decided to not actually go through with it and he stopped and I got out of the car, he like ran after me and was so apologetic and so upset, and like wouldn't let me go until I said, yes, we're still together. He was so worried I would break up with him that he was like, I can't leave you until you say we're still together, we're still together. And so I was like, okay, fine, Um, but yeah, it took a long time to get to a point where I could actually have that kind of blindfold taken off enough to where I could just say, I don't know why, but I'm not happy and I don't want to be with you anymore.
Mhm.
But really recognizing what happened in this relationship, that took a long time, a couple of years of just slowly, I would think about something and be like, oh, that's what that was.
Yep.
Um, yeah.
When you were going through all of this, did your did your parents or your friends like understand the extent of it, or could they like notice that something was off?
I think my parents weren't sure. It's hard with a teenage relationship too, because parents have a hard time discerning, is this typical teenage angst, mom, you don't understand me?
Mhm.
Or is this something worse? And that does make it really hard to detect a teenage abusive relationship, which is why they go so undetected.
Right.
But I think I remember my parents encouraging me to stick with it when I broke up with him, because I would tell them every time I broke up with him that I did. And my parents and I were so close. I mean, I would tell them everything. Um, and well, everything kind of, but up until then, I had told them everything. You know, we were very
Mhm.
close. We didn't fight. Like, we had a really great relationship. And so I think their warning sign was that our relationship was changing so much. But again, it was hard for them to know, is this just Leah being a teenager, or is this something worse? And I do remember um, the last failed attempt of breaking up with him was right before my sweet 16 birthday party that I had. And I was dress shopping with my mom, and I remember feeling like, wow, this is really nice. Like, we haven't had a day like this in a long time, or I could just hang out with her. Because I wasn't glued to my phone texting him back, because if I didn't text him back within like 0.2 seconds, there'd be hell to pay. And so, since we were broken up at the time, it was okay. And we could just actually hang out, me and my mom. And we were shopping for dresses, and I was in the changing room. And I remember getting a text from him saying, you know, I love you. I miss you. I want you back. And I decided to go back to him. And so I told my parents that night that I'd gotten back together with him, and I wanted him to be at the party. And they said, Leah, maybe he shouldn't be at the party, because, you know, sometimes it's better to just have time with your friends and not always be with your boyfriend. And I knew that if he didn't go to that party, that, I mean, I wouldn't survive it. Like, the fight would be horrendous. Um and the accusations would just go wild, right? That was not an option. But they didn't know that.
Mhm.
So what they're seeing is a 16-year-old girl saying, I really want my boyfriend to be at my party, and how dare you say that he can't? Um and what I'm saying is, I'm going to be in huge trouble, and this is scaring me a lot to think about him not being there. And we were together for that party. The party was like the next week or something, right? And um, I remember him saying, "Oh, my dad said I have to babysit tonight. I can't go." And I freaked out, and I was begging him to come, because I knew that if I didn't, it wasn't that I wanted him there. You know, that would have been great if he had not gone, but it was more that I knew that this was a setup for me to beg for him to go. And if he wasn't there, that I would have so much explaining to do and defending to do and all of that. And I did not want to, so I had to beg and beg and beg for him to come. And I was so stressed out the first half of the party because he wasn't there. And then when he finally got there, I mean, he basically just whisked me away, and it was just me and him. And like, I didn't talk to any of the guests, didn't have any fun at this, what would have been a really fun birthday party. So um, I think my parents just saw it as like, I think at that point they were starting to think, this is kind of ridiculous. Like, this is a 16-year-old. She shouldn't be so intense about this relationship, you know. But I don't think that they really understood the danger I was in until after the relationship ended and he started putting all of us in danger.
Yeah, you in your film Untold, you talk about you said you were at a concert and you got a phone call from police.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that experience?
Yeah. Um Well, that was after a few months of us being broken up. And during those few months, he started stalking me physically and online. At the time, it was all Facebook. So he would make fake Facebook accounts and reach out to me pretending to be um, I don't know, a whole cast of people. He would pretend to be his cousin and then pretend to be someone who went to the middle school that fed into my high school. And then he'd pretend to be his friend and on and on. And he would use that to continue to abuse me verbally and try to get information about me. And he broke into my house twice. Um, the first time he broke in, he stole a front door key and read my diary that I keep. And then he sent me a text that quoted that diary. And so I got that text while I was at school, and I was so confused because that I was like, how did he? It was a very specific quote that I was like, I didn't say this. Like, I just couldn't figure it out. Right. And him
Mm-hmm.
breaking it across my mind. And after I got that text, I went to math class and my friend was like, Leah, what were you texting me last night? That was super weird. And I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. And she shows me her phone. And the night before, around midnight, there were all these texts between her and me, or my phone, talking about my ex. And the questions from me were like, hey, like, did I tell you that I really miss my ex? And she would be like, what are you talking about? Like, you told me that you don't miss him at all. And then I would be like, oh, that's funny. I kind of forget what I told you. Can you tell me what I told you? Um, and kind of basically trying to get information about like what I had been up to and if I had been seeing anyone, and what I had been telling people about him. And so when I saw those text messages, me knowing that I was asleep during this whole time, I figured out that he had somehow been in my room to read the diary and to use my phone. And I talked to my mom. She was a teacher at my high school. So I ran into her classroom, interrupted class, and I was like, I have to talk to you. And I told her this, and she then told me that the day before they had noticed broken windows in the like laundry room area, and they thought it's where we keep the cat food. They thought it was a coyote. There's lots of coyotes in our neighborhood. But
Mm-hmm.
they realized, basically we put together that he had broken in the first time to take a key to the front door and read the diary, and then come back that night through the front door to use my phone while I was sleeping to pretend to be me and text my friends. So we call the police, and the police really didn't do anything. They took fingerprints from the window. I don't know if they got anything. They wrote down what those texts said, and they said basically, well, call us when he actually touches you and hurts you, which is not helpful, and was very frustrating. So we started looking into getting a restraining order. He broke in another time while none of us were home, and then posted on Facebook about it, to make sure we knew it had happened, and continue to show up where I would be. I was, like I said, a cheerleader, so he would show up at the games I was cheering at. He'd show up at school. We had to give all of my school administration pictures of him so that they would know who to look for. Um, we did get like a preliminary restraining order, which I don't remember exactly what the legal situation was, but we got something, although I don't know if it was super helpful. But that is what ended up being why the police called me that night when I was at this Ed Sheeran concert with my friends in high school. Um, it was a different city police. It was the Pasadena police, and they um, found this. There was this kid that I think was like a troubled kid, and the his dad would constantly kind of call the cops on him to try and straighten him out, right? And so it happened again. This kid comes home drunk, and dad's upset. Dad calls the cops on him, and the cops are like, dude, figure yourself out. But then they see a backpack in his room with a baseball bat and rope hanging out of it. And they said, well, what's this? And I guess he gave them permission to look in it, which makes me laugh. Because in the backpack was baseball bats, rope, chloroform, condoms, and bullets. And so the police said, what is this? And eventually they got um, I forget the word, not a subpoena, but whatever it is to be able to look through his phone. And he had been conspiring with my ex. So my ex had reached out to him. I guess he used to go to the same school or something. So he knew him and knew he was kind of like a troubled guy who, I don't know, maybe could help him do some troubling things.
Mm-hmm.
And they had created this plan to, to break into my house, to take out my mom and my sister and tie them up with rope, to use the chloroform and the bat on my dad, and then to rape me and to shoot me. And they discussed this all in detail via text. They shared, he took a picture of my house and sent it to him. Um, and so when the police found this, of course, they called me because I had a restraining order against my ex. And they were like, well, let me talk to your dad, you know. So I gave him my dad's number and they talked to my dad. And my dad immediately called me and was like, I'm picking you up right now. And took me home. My friends were like, what is going on? And I was like, honestly, I don't know. But something bad, you know, with my ex. And it actually took a long time for me to know what the whole thing that they were planning. It's actually one of the moments in the film that you mentioned. My dad tells me what it was they were planning, and that's the first time I hear it, is when we were filming that. Um, Understandably, the police did not tell me all of that. I knew what was in the backpack, but I didn't know that it had all been so explicitly discussed. And so that's what actually finally started the court process against him. This kid who was the conspirator got, I think I testified against him at his hearing, and he got like a conspiracy to break and enter charge. But I don't think he served any jail time. But my ex was charged with, I think, 7 or 8 felonies. And he also admitted to breaking into my house a couple of times prior. But the stalking is what was the highest charge. And I had all this evidence because he left it all on my phone, all these messages, voicemails, all the threats. They were able to prove that all of those Facebook accounts came from his home IP address, you know. So he ended up pleading guilty to stalking, which carries a 2-year sentence, of which he served 1 year. And I haven't heard from him since. At least I don't think so. You know, every now and then I'll get a weird Facebook message and I'll freak out a little bit, but a lot of times it's just spam or something, you know, benign. Um, and yeah, so that all happened my junior and senior year. That was when all the court cases were going through. Um, and and yeah, I mean, my that whole part of the story is like so, it really goes off the deep end of what happens in abusive relationships, although it's not an uncommon thing for the abuse to continue afterwards. What is uncommon about that part of the story is that he actually served jail time, which is so rare. And I did tell my DA that he raped me uh, like countless number of times while we were together. And she said, you know, I will support you if you want to bring that charge against him. However, I have to warn you that it probably won't be successful. It will probably undermine the rest of the case, and it will be hell for you because you have no way of proving it. You will have to answer so many disgusting questions, and it will become he said, she said. And with this, we have evidence. And with that, we don't. And so, you know, you can choose. And so I didn't bring rape charges against him. But, you know, I did get some version of justice that I do feel was appropriate. So,
And with the rape charges, I wrote a paper on this during my master's program about why people don't report sexual assault and rape so often, and a lot of it is because the system and the process of going through the legal system is like so traumatizing in and of itself, and that it's like so unlikely to be successful, which is just awful to think about, because it's like what like what can we do for the countless women that are experiencing this? It's like there's no like recourse. There's like nothing to make it right. Um
Yeah.
what was what was the experience like having to testify against him?
Yeah, it was intense. I remember when I learned that I had to well, I didn't have to testify, but that I should testify, and I chose to. I remember spending a full therapy session with a therapist I was seeing with a calendar, trying to figure out what happened when, because already my memory was failing me, because when you go through trauma, memory gets really messed up. It either you don't form memories, or you form memories but you attach them to the wrong time.
Mm-hmm.
I still kind of have like a timeline where I think everything happened, and my dad's like, no, I'm pretty sure this happened before, and my mom's like, no, I think this was then, and none of us even really know. So I remember trying to figure that out so that I could be prepared. And how hard that was. And I was like, how do I not know when this happened? This was all within the last like 3 months. Um, and when I did testify against him, it was the first time I saw him. Um, well, actually, it wasn't the first time I saw him since we broke up, because I saw him when he would show up at the places that I was at. But it was the first time I saw him since all of that. And we were very close physically to each other, and his family was there. And I I think it was about an hour and a half that I was on the stand. It felt like a really long time. And actually, I not that long ago requested the transcripts from that. And it's really interesting to have those transcripts, because even now, even with all the activism that I do and all the speaking about this, I still doubt myself constantly. And so having like the transcripts is like physical evidence that this all really did happen. It was really that bad, and it did all happen. A judge believed me. And, that all is very validating in a weird way. And sometimes I go back and read the transcripts. And there were so many silly questions that his lawyer asked me about. I had a dog, and so we spent a long time on the dog, because the dog didn't bark when he broke in. And I was like, well, the dog was used to him coming over every single night. This is not a guard dog. This is not a dog that barks. This is
Mm-hmm.
this is like a very sweet lab that she just sleeps all day. So, I remember having to like explain that, but I was very good at defending myself by that point. I knew how to do it. Um, and thankfully, it was a pretty straightforward case, because he didn't try to hide what he was doing. He wasn't trying to hide the evidence. He wanted me to know this was happening. He never thought that I would call the cops. That's what it was. He never thought that I would go to police about any of this. So he wanted me to know I was doing it. He wanted me to know that he still had power over me and control over me, and that he could still hurt me anytime he wanted to. And really, I wouldn't probably have gone to the cops myself if it hadn't involved my parents and my family and my younger sister who lived there. And them knowing about it is what changed things.
Did they get into the specifics? Because it's like they charge him with stalking, but I mean, when he was like working with that other kid, like they were clearly planning something horrible. Did they ever get into that, and like why? I don't know, like why wasn't it something more than just stalking?
Well, yeah, he was charged with conspiracy to break and enter, 2 counts of breaking and entering, 2 counts of criminal threat, a count of stalking, and oh god, there was something else too. So he was charged with conspiracy to break and enter and breaking and entering. It's just that he ended up taking a plea deal
Mm,
and pleading guilty to stalking, because stalking was at the time in California like a strike. It was the one that was the highest. Um, crime, I guess.
Mhm.
Um, so that's why that's what he pled guilty to, because that was like the thing that we were most likely to accept as a plea deal. I remember getting the call from my DA while I was in English class and having to step outside and have my DA tell me that my ex has pled guilty to stalking and I think we should take the plea deal. Um, because otherwise it will be the longest trial ever and I will have to testify a million times more. And it might not even result in a higher um, sentencing. Most of those carried a 2-year sentence. And so he could have theoretically gotten like 8 or 10 years, but it would have been unlikely that the judge would have him serve consecutive sentences. And I don't know, there's risk involved and there's trauma involved. And um, testifying against him was one of the hardest things I ever had to do. I remember not sleeping for a week. Like my best friend came with me. My dad couldn't be in the room with me because he was also testifying.
Mm.
So we couldn't be in the room at the same time, which was very hard. I did have an advocate with me from a great organization in LA called Peace Over Violence, and she was very helpful. But it was very hard and very scary, and I did not want to do it again. And so, yeah, we took the plea deal, which I think was the right choice for us to do.
Definitely. What was it like? Because I mean, I just think it's like these are your last, years of high school. It's already such like, I feel like such like a formative time for teens, and it's already so complicated just with like the dynamics of kids. But what was it like going through this during those years in high school?
Oh, yeah, I didn't really get to be a high schooler. I
Yeah.
had to grow up really fast. Um, It really alienated me from all of my friends. This is kind of like the second round of abuse that happened was from my friends. They did not understand what was going on at all. They were getting their information from me, who was an unreliable narrator because I was busy going through all of this. And so they were like, "Well, you said that you loved him and that it was all fine, and now you're saying it's not. And you said that you guys had sex, but now you're saying it was rape." And they didn't really believe me. I think there was some weird kind of jealousy going on too, because I was getting what might have appeared to be special treatment from the administration at the school, from my teachers. I took a leave of absence for 3 weeks my junior year because I was barely going to school anyways. And that was the only way that I was going to get the resources I needed to actually like pass all of my classes. Um, and yeah, that was really hard. They spread rumors about me, and I mean they got mean and they got angry. And looking back on it now, um I can understand how scared they must have been, and that all of it was a defense mechanism. But it was kind of earth-shattering because I had really close, really good friends for a long time, and I am not friends with them anymore. And it was really hard to have all of that happen as well as everything else going on. The adults on campus were very helpful. My cheer coach and my dance teacher were two adults that I was already very close to. And so they understood what was happening and were able to help me as much as they could. And some of the teachers too. I mentioned my mom as a teacher at the high school, and that was really helpful to have her there while I was in school. Um, but I really just kind of became pretty isolated at that point by choice. I wasn't interested in being friends with any of my previous friend group anymore. And I I see it now. I work with high schoolers a lot now. And what I have to remind myself sometimes when they get really dramatic is that their world is really small and their perspective is pretty small. And so something that seems little to an adult is going to be massive to them, right? And that is kind of a great thing, because how nice for you that the hardest thing you've been through is that, your boyfriend didn't ask you to prom in the way that you wanted him to, or whatever. But what happened with me made my perspective so wide. All of a sudden, I had kind of not quite the perspective of an adult, but certainly a much broader perspective on life. And so all the trivial things that my friend cared so much about, I was like, this is nothing. This doesn't matter, and so I kind of just checked out of the social part of high school for the last year or so, and just got through it. And I went to college out of state, wanted, some space from it all, and found friends in college that were understanding and supportive and interested in what happened. And I pursued dance in college and choreographed uh, new works about being a survivor. And I started my nonprofit while I was in college. We filmed that documentary and released it. So that became more of the time of my life that felt like maybe what high school should have been, but wasn't. But I did have some friends in high school that really did stick by me and were able to help. But a lot of them really didn't understand it all. And I actually, in the last couple of years, reached out to those old friends and interviewed them about why all of that happened in high school. And it was really eye opening. Some of them were apologetic. Some of them stuck by everything that they did. Some of them didn't remember a lot of stuff that happened. Some of them remembered stuff that I didn't remember. And that was a really interesting journey to kind of get some closure on a lot of those friendships and give me the gift of the context of their experience of it, so that I no longer had the narrative of, and then my friends turned on me and for no reason, and I was victimized once again. But it gives me a little bit of power back for their actions to belong to them and not be something that I warranted.
Yeah, definitely. And then you go on to found the Sunflower Project. Can you tell me about that?
Sure. The Sunflower Project is a nonprofit organization that I started in 2015, and we operate in LA now. And the purpose is I'm operating on the ends of the spectrum of a survivor's timeline. So I'm interested in working in prevention in middle and high schoolers. And then on the other end of the spectrum, I work with survivors after they are kind of out of the crisis time. And I do both sides of that work through art and mostly through movement and dance. So I use choreography and art making as a tool for education to start the conversation in middle and high schoolers. The documentary film, live performances, art making workshops with young people to explore this information and talk about what is healthy and not healthy in a relationship. And then on the other end of the spectrum, I use art making as a tool to empower survivors to tell their stories and to integrate that survivor identity into their life and into their body in a way that can be joyful and fulfilling and not only painful or heavy, and also not neutral. I feel that I like to say I'm not proud of being a survivor, but I am proud of what being a survivor makes me. And for me, being a survivor makes me empathetic. It makes me curious. It makes me in touch with my body. It makes me kind of a bittersweet person, which I feel like allows me to experience the full spectrum of emotion all the time and feel, the gloriousness of life and the impermanence of happiness at the same time, which I feel like results in a really full existence. Um, and I use movement and sensation and a somatic movement technique called the body memory method, which I created a couple years ago to integrate the identity of a survivor into my body and to speak with my body and relate with my body and have compassion for my body and learn from my body. And that's a practice I share with survivors. Um, I feel like as a society, when it comes to any sort of traumatic experience, there are resources for that immediate trauma and post-trauma kind of crisis moment. And then there are some resources available for post crisis, like talk therapy or group therapy. But then once you get to a point in your therapy where you're like, okay, like I've probably unpacked it all, you're getting to that therapy session, you're like, I don't know if I have much to say right now, but I'm not like a fully excited, happy, joyful person all the time, but like I don't even know what to really say or bring to this. And I don't want to go back and talk about it again, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, that the body memory method and the work I do with survivors is about like, okay, when you're at that space, how do we actually find like the celebratory side and the joyful side and the super deep feeling, like feeling this in your bones and your veins side, not just, okay, I am out of crisis, I am back to normal life, because it does change our lives and it does change our bodies and it can change everything. And that's not a death sentence. That's not a thing that has to be scary. It can be something that we can celebrate. We can find the immense beauty in the ways that we change, which to me is just the most empowering thing, because are taking we're saying, fine, if you're going to give me this terrible hand, if you're going to deal me this awful hand, I'm going to have a great life. I'm going to make it enhance my life. I'm not just going to say it won't affect me and I'm going to get back to business as usual. I'm actually going to use it as something that makes my life better than it could have ever been. um so that to me feels like the most empowering way to recover and survive and thrive, is that it's actually making my life better than it would have been otherwise.
I think that's such a great perspective and a great way to look at it. And I really like that you're incorporating, I feel like, I mean, it seems obvious when I like think about it in my head, but it's like incorporating like alternative ways to deal with these really traumatic situations, because it's kind of like learning. Like some people learn better hands-on, visually, or through reading. And so it makes sense that some people would maybe be able to process or like deal with certain events in a way that's like beyond just like talking about it. And so I think
Yeah.
and I mean, it makes total sense to just like have alternative ways to be able to express yourself. And I think that is just so cool. Um, you talk about also working with people, like young people on the more prevention side. One thing, and I don't want to take away because I know men and boys can also be victims of domestic violence, but what can men do? And what can, like, how do we teach young men, and how can just men in general like contribute to like stopping this pattern of violence against women?
Yeah, that's a huge part of that work. I mean, there's not a lot of prevention work going on. If you think about where the funding dollar is going to go, they're going to go to shelters, and immediate crisis intervention, which makes sense. I mean, I'm not saying we don't need funds there. We need tons more funds there than there are currently. But when the budgets get cut, what are they going to cut? The shelters or the programs they do in schools for the 12-year-olds? Probably the program they do in schools. So there's not a lot of prevention work happening. So I do feel really passionate about working in those spaces. And as much as adults don't want to think about it, your 12-year-old is thinking about sex. Your 8-year-old might be thinking about sex. It's biological and it happens to almost everyone. And also, your 8-year-old and your 12-year-old, whether you gave them a phone or not, they're on TikTok, they're on Instagram, they're on Snapchat. They are being fed so much information, and most of it is bad. And I'm not taking up the helm of fixing the information that they're being fed, because that is not in my wheelhouse, though there are people who are doing that work, and more power to them. We need that for sure. But we do have to do some damage control. And as adults, we have to be the adults in the room, and we have to get over the fact that it's weird to talk to your kid or to talk to your students or to talk to your nephew about this stuff. Get over it and do it, because it could literally save lives. The abuser that I was in a relationship with, I think he was one of the many boys who fell victim to the cycle of abuse. His father was abusive to him. He did not come from a two-parent household. He, was taught that way of love, and he perpetuated that way of love. And I think that I'm not sure at the point that he met me that there was much the world could have done for him to change his behavior. However, there are tons of young boys out there that need intervention in their own behavior and won't get it, and will become a man who abuses their partner, which could have been prevented if they had had some intervention and some tools. We know that boys are being fed information about dominating women, and sex being a power play, something to brag about, that women are seen as objects to be chased, to be used, to be discarded. Those messages are being given to them through almost every form of media they're consuming, and then they're talking to each other about it. And in the same way that my girlfriends and I were saying, "Oh, it's so cute how jealous he is because he loves me so much," they're saying equally problematic things to each other and validating those problematic uh, thought patterns to each other. And no one is stepping in to provide some intervention. So I do try to do as much work with young girls as I do with young boys, to talk about, healthy masculinity, and giving them the same information that I give girls, which is what is a healthy relationship and what is not. A lot of times, these unhealthy relationship dynamics are replicated within platonic friendships too. And a lot of times we see that with, girls who are in platonic girl friendships and boys who are in platonic boy friendships. And that can be where it starts. And then it gets replicated when they're in a romantic relationship. And so even if boys are not, yet dating someone, they're in friendships and they're in relationships. It could help them identify an unhealthy dynamic going on between their parent and them, which could be the root cause of, possible future problematic behavior. And giving them permission to ask questions, to talk about it with someone who's not their best buddy, who's going to make fun of them for asking those questions. And uh, even just, I really do believe in the power of planting those seeds in their brains. That's kind of what we're always trying to do when you're talking about raising kids and creating, thoughtful, empathetic, kind adults. You're just planting seeds in their head, and you hope that if you plant enough seeds, one of them will grow, and they might have that tiny voice in the back of their head the next time they're, having those kinds of conversations or engaging in that kind of behavior. Normalizing talking about relationships. It's not just a lack of sex education that is a problem, but I mean, there is an entire abandonment of relationship education when it comes to middle and high schoolers. It's one thing if a kid has a sex ed class and they learn how pregnancy works and what a condom is. That's great. However, no one's teaching them how to be in healthy relationship with each other. No one's teaching them how to communicate their feelings. And a lot of times, especially now, media is kind of starting to talk more openly about these things. Like I see so many TikToks about healthy boundaries, and I get so frustrated sometimes because like the concept of boundaries has totally gotten flipped on its head. A boundary is not a mandate that you give to your partner. A boundary is about your own experience and your own action. And when I say that to middle and high school kids, they freak out. They're like, what are you talking about? I thought, well, my boundary is you don't go out at night with blah, blah, blah. No, that's not a boundary. That's control and manipulation, right? But it gets co-opted and it gets created. It gets turned into something that, is like a 2-minute soundbite and a thing that will get clicks and likes. And that's the world we live in. And as an adult, I can watch those videos and say, oh, this person is making this video to get clicks and likes and make some money. As a kid, they think this is the expert on the situation. And so it's simple. It's not brain science. We just need to talk to them explicitly about it, not using euphemisms, not alluding to things, but being explicit and making things very clear. There is no gray area when it comes to abuse, and people talk about the gray area all the time. There is no gray area. There is healthy and unhealthy. And probably if you're thinking you're in a gray area, you're not. You're in the unhealthy side, right? But adults get so like squeamish about it, and they're like, well, and I'm like, no, you just have to grow up and talk to them about it, because I think when I tell adults, teachers, and parents how common abuse under the age of 18 is, then they say, oh, okay. Like this isn't just a random thing that may happen. This is something we have to actively fight against. And it's only getting more and more common. So now is not the time to relax and let TikTok teach your son how to be a good boyfriend. Now is really the time to grow up and to speak explicitly and have multiple conversations, not just one, because they did not hear you the first time, to watch media with them and point out the problems that you're seeing in real time, give them the tools to do that. Because they're not all beyond the pale. It's not, they're not all lost causes, and that thinking that a young boy could be a lost cause is so harmful for them and for young women. It's harmful for the world. And it's why we end up with adult men who terrorize people. It is because they were a boy at one point that nobody taught what they needed to learn.
I think that's such a good point. And I do think sometimes people look at the problem and it's like, oh, well, that kid, he's trouble. He's, never gonna, that's just what he's gonna do. And it's like, no, like, and that just reinforces that for them. And yeah, also just sitting down and having conversations. Like it sounds so simple, but it's just crazy. I feel like how many parents like just avoid doing that. And it's like, if you are not sitting down and teaching your kids, like especially in this day and age where everyone is so chronically online, like they're going to learn whatever it is they see online, which is horrifying because the internet is just like the worst place for
It
young
is the
kids to
worst
be.
place. Yeah, it's terrible. And there's no keeping them off of it. I mean,
No.
there just isn't. Even if you don't give your kid a phone or a TikTok account, they're gonna get it. I mean, kids are not dumb. They're actually very smart and they will do anything to fit in, because we are programmed to do anything to fit in, because that is what that time in our life is all about. So that's what fitting in means. It means behaving in these ways and accessing that media Yeah. And I said before, and I'll say again, example is not prevention. So thinking, well, I set a good example for my kid because I'm a kind person. I treat women with respect, blah, blah, blah. That is not prevention at all, like not even close, you know. And it's so important to acknowledge that and to just, yeah, get over your squeamishness and have those conversations, because it does seem so simple, but we don't do it. And I don't have kids, and so I know that when I do, and when they're, 12, and I still think of them as my teeny tiny babies, I'm not going to want to talk to them about sex. I know, but I'm going to have to do it and get over it, because I know, from experience that it literally can save lives and change lives. And that is your duty as a parent or as an adult in a kid's life. It might not come from a parent. If you have a kid in your life that is not your child, you should also be talking to them about this stuff. Sometimes it feels more impactful when it doesn't come from mom or dad, but it comes from the cool aunt or the neighbor or the family friend or the teacher or the coach or whoever.
Oh yeah, I get that. I have a 7-year-old son, and it's like he doesn't listen to anything that I say, but if it's coming from someone else, he's like, okay, yes, like I'll do that. Like,
Right.
and so I'm like,
Exactly.
oh,
Yeah.
great. Well,
Right.
I
Yeah.
think I seriously have so much respect for how you have like taken this just like horrifying situation and have turned it into something that I know is going to have so much impact on every person who hears your story, every person that you work with, whether it be young people or survivors themselves. I just think it's incredible. Before we wrap up, is there anything else that you wanted to share? I don't want to, I don't want to miss anything.
um, I think I'm on like a mission to share the joy in survivorship. I think that's what media gets wrong a lot when they portray survivors. And it is true that it is awful and hard, and not everyone survives. And it's something that no one should have to go through. And it's not a story that I should have to tell over and over, because it shouldn't have happened. But it did happen. It continues to happen. And it is not a sentence to being a closed off, unloving, unlovable person. If anything, I am more loving and more lovable and more open because of what I had to do in order to survive. It's not because of what he did to me that made me a good person, but it's what I had to then do. It's the challenge that I was handed in order to survive and get through it that made me the person I am today. And that's a person I am really proud of. And I think that when we share survivor stories, it is so often in this like dark and sad way. There's a trigger warning. This story talks about sexual abuse. We're all going to, play the sad music and cry and hear this really, really awful story. And then that allows people who are listening to be removed from it, because they can say, "Oh, that's so sad." And we have that superhero complex of like, "But that will never happen to me." But how sad it is that that happened to that lady, right?
Mm-hmm.
When the reality is that everyone knows a survivor, whether or not you know that they are a survivor, you all know a survivor. You probably know like 20 survivors, right? We are still looking at the statistic of one of every three women is a survivor of sexual abuse or domestic violence or sexual assault at some point in their lifetime. And it's probably higher than that because that's what's reported. That statistic has not gotten any better. In the last 30, 40 years, there's been no movement on that statistic. And so I feel like we get these stories fed to us that are just these like somber basket cases, and it allows us to, yeah, view them as this like this dramatic reading of a thing that happens to other people. but it is so common, and it is, people are able to not think it's so common because survivors can be normal people. They can be
Mm-hmm.
joyful. They can be in loving relationships. They can hook up with a whole bunch of people if they want, right? They can have any relationship to sex that they choose. They can be married or have kids or be in a polyamorous relationship. I mean, they can do literally anything they want to do, right? And so showing survivors at the point of a fully joyful, celebratory, happy life. Survivors who can, have one night stands or have long term loving relationships. Survivors who can be sexually empowered, could be, very like outwardly sexual people. Like, survivors are people, and they're everywhere. And so I think it's important to show that when we are telling survivor stories, to not only ever tell like that really really hard traumatizing part, and to show the survivor as a human being, as a full human being. And so I appreciate the chance to talk about that on this podcast, because even though, we're talking about my story, and my story is a very like dark and wild ride, it's not the whole story, and it's not a thing that happens to other people, and it's not an anomaly. And it doesn't make me like some untouchable alien where you could see me in the grocery store and be like, oh, something happened to her. I'm a normal person, and I'm your kid's cheer coach. I am your friend's friend. I'm, in a relationship. I like have hobbies. I'm a normal person, right? And all the normal people in your life, many of them are also survivors. And while it's not something to celebrate, that this club is so big, it is something to acknowledge. And I think, there is something to celebrate, which is that, women are strong and survivors are strong. And we come out the other side and we become incredible people who can change the world.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Um, I just think what you're doing is so great. And I feel like, I mean, there are so many aspects of your story that I can personally relate to. I know anyone who listens to this, there's going to be little bits and pieces. And I hope that the story reaches someone and can help them either get through it or help them get out of a situation before it gets worse.
Yeah, I hope so too. I think it will. Thank you for the
Definitely.
platform.
Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to this episode of Cardinal Crimes. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing, giving us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcast, and sharing this episode with others. You can find us on TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram with the handle @CardinalCrimes, and you can send us any case suggestions, questions, or topics you would like covered there or to our email, cardinalcrimes@gmail.com. Until next time, friends, take care of each other and take care of yourself.